And what you gonna do when Hulkamania and the largest arms in the world run wild on you?
Tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. right here in
Quote 1. What you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you? Picture this, Madison Square Garden, 1985. 20,000 people on their feet. But there's something different in the air tonight. It's not just excitement, it's desperation. Because the man standing in that ring isn't just flexing his 24-inch pythons. He's staring into a camera, and through that lens, he's looking directly at you. His eyes aren't the cartoon hero eyes you remember. They're predator eyes, hunter eyes. And when his voice drops to that gravelly whisper, when he leans into that microphone like he's sharing a secret that could destroy worlds, every person in that arena, every person watching at home, feels their spine straighten. Because Hulk Hogan isn't asking a question, he's making a promise. But here's what nobody talks about. Here's the truth that wrestling historians won't tell you because it's too uncomfortable, too real. That line wasn't written for wrestling fans. It wasn't written for adults who understood the choreography, the predetermined outcomes, the business behind the curtain. It was written for children who still believed in magic. And Hogan? Hogan knew exactly what he was doing. Rewind to 1983, Terry Bollea is dying. Not literally, but creatively, spiritually, professionally. He's been grinding through regional territories, playing a generic heel character that nobody remembers 5 minutes after the show ends. His career is flatlining, and at 30 years old in a young man's business, he's running out of chances. Then Vince McMahon Jr. calls. The conversation lasts exactly 7 minutes. McMahon doesn't want another wrestler. He wants a legend. He wants someone who can look into a camera and make people believe that the impossible is not only possible, it's inevitable. I need you to become something that's never existed before, McMahon tells him. I need you to become hope. The first time Hogan tried that line in a promo, it felt wrong. Awkward, like wearing someone else's skin. He stumbled over the words, his timing was off, and the crowd responded with confused silence. He almost scrapped it. It's 3 weeks later, Boston Garden. Hogan is preparing for his promo when he notices something that stops him cold. A kid, maybe 8 years old, wearing a Hulkamania t-shirt, 3 sizes too big, sitting in the front row with his father. The kid's eyes are wide, unblinking, locked on Hogan like he's witnessing the second coming. And in that moment, something clicks. Hogan realizes he's not performing for the adults. He's not even performing for the teenagers. He's performing for that kid who still believes that good guys always win, that muscles can solve problems, that saying your prayers and eating your vitamins actually makes you invincible. That's when the line transforms from words into a weapon. When he leans into the camera this time, when he asks what you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you, he's not asking his opponent. He's asking every bully, every obstacle, every force of darkness that stands between that 8-year-old kid and his dreams. Within 6 months, something unprecedented happens. Kids start using the line on playground bullies. Teenagers mutter it under their breath before job interviews. Adults whisper it in mirrors before difficult conversations. The line escapes wrestling. It becomes cultural DNA. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Hogan himself becomes trapped by it. Because once you become someone's definition of invincible, what happens when you start feeling very, very human? By 1987, Hogan can't go anywhere without someone shouting that line at him. Grocery stores, airports, his daughter's school plays. It follows him like a shadow, like a promise he made to the world that he's not sure he can keep forever. And late at night, when the crowds are gone and the arena lights are dim, when his knees ache and his back throbs and he's staring at himself in locker room mirrors, he whispers the line back to his own reflection, not as Hulk Hogan the character, as Terry Bollea the man, asking himself the same question he's been asking the world. What are you gonna do when your own mythology runs wild on you? Because the moment you stop asking permission and start making promises, to yourself, to the world, to that 8-year-old kid still sitting in the front row of your dreams, everything changes. You stop being the person things happen to. You become the person things happen because of. That line didn't make Hulk Hogan famous. It made him responsible. Responsible for every kid who learned to stand up to bullies. Responsible for every person who found courage they didn't know they had. Responsible for proving, night after night, match after match, that sometimes the good guy really does win. Quote 2. Say your prayers and eat your vitamins. Picture a boardroom in Stamford, Connecticut, 1985. Vince McMahon is pacing like a caged animal, his vision burning behind his eyes. On the table, toy prototypes, cartoon sketches, and market research that proves one terrifying truth: wrestling is dying with its aging audience. We need to save the children first, McMahon says, his voice carrying the weight of a man betting everything on a single hand. If we can't make them believe, we'll never make their parents buy. That's when Hogan speaks up with 4 words that will reshape an entire generation's moral compass. Say your prayers and eat your vitamins. The room goes silent, because everyone knows they've just witnessed the birth of something unprecedented, a steroid-enhanced superhero teaching Sunday school. But here's what nobody talks about. Here's the uncomfortable truth that marketing executives still whisper about in dimly lit conference rooms. They were selling salvation through spectacle. Think about it. Here's a man whose biceps defied human biology, whose tan came from a bottle, whose blonde mustache was as artificial as his storylines, and he's positioned as the moral authority for America's children. It wasn't just cognitive dissonance, it was genius. Rewind to Hogan's childhood in Tampa Bay. Picture an 11-year-old Terry Bollea, scrawny and forgotten, watching his alcoholic father stumble through another dinner where the silence cuts deeper than any words could. That kid made himself a promise: when I grow up, I'll be different. I'll be the dad these kids never had. Fast forward 25 years, that same man is standing in front of millions of children, and the weight of that childhood promise is crushing his chest. Because he knows that behind the cameras, behind the character, he's just as human as his father ever was. But the children are watching, and they need him to be perfect. Within months, something never done before happens across America. Dinner tables become battlegrounds. Mom, Hulk Hogan says I need to eat my vegetables. Dad, Hulk Hogan says I should pray before bed. Parents find themselves competing with a fictional character for moral authority over their own children. And here's the twist: most of them are losing. Because Hogan never yelled, never disappointed, never came home drunk or forgot a birthday or broke a promise. He was the perfect father figure for an entire generation of imperfect fathers. But late at night, when the interviews are done and the arena lights fade, Hogan stares at himself in hotel mirrors and asks the question that keeps him awake. What happens when they find out I'm not the man I told them to become? Because he's preaching nutrition while his own body runs on chemicals that would terrify a pharmacist. He's advocating prayer while living a lifestyle that would make a televangelist blush. He's selling moral purity while knowing that everything about his public persona is a carefully constructed lie. The line becomes his prison. Every child who approaches him with wide, trusting eyes. Every parent who thanks him for being a better role model than they could ever be. Every letter from a kid who says they started eating vegetables because Hulk Hogan told them to. Each one a reminder that he's not saving children, he's teaching them to love an illusion. But here's what nobody expected. Here's the plot twist that even Vince McMahon couldn't have scripted. It worked anyway. 38 years later, men in their 40s still tell stories about how Hulk Hogan taught them to take care of their bodies. How his words gave them permission to believe in something bigger than themselves. How a fictional character's moral guidance became the foundation for real-world goodness. The man was a lie, but the message was true. Quote 3, "You can't stop the power of the NWO, brother." July 7, 1996. Bash at the Beach. The moment that split wrestling history into before and after. For 13 years, Hulk Hogan had been the moral center of the wrestling universe. The red and yellow, the prayers and vitamins, the unwavering belief that good conquers evil, that hard work pays off, that heroes always find a way. Then he ripped off his shirt, revealed the black and white beneath, and with 5 words, "You can't stop the power of the NWO," he murdered childhood itself. Not metaphorically, literally, because 15,000 fans didn't just boo that night, they grieved. Here's the truth that still makes wrestling executives uncomfortable. Hogan didn't turn heel, he told the truth. Think about it. For over a decade he'd been lying to everyone, including himself, pretending that muscles and mustaches and morning prayers could solve the world's problems. Pretending that good guys always win when he'd spent years watching good guys get buried, get forgotten, get replaced by younger, hungrier versions of themselves. That night at Bash at the Beach, Terry Bollea finally looked in the mirror and admitted what he'd known all along. The hero was a lie, and he was tired of lying. Rewind to 1994. Behind the scenes, Hogan is drowning, ratings are falling. The cartoon bright optimism of the 1980s feels as outdated as his handlebar mustache. Kids are growing up, finding new heroes, and suddenly the man who taught them about vitamins feels like a relic. He watches Monday Night Raw dominate his old territory. sees Stone Cold Steve Austin getting the reactions he used to get, realizes that the world has moved on from needing Superman. Now they want Batman. Dark, complicated, morally unclear Batman. What if, he thinks in the lonely darkness of another hotel room, I stopped trying to be what they needed me to be, and started being what I actually am? What if he stopped apologizing for his flaws and started celebrating them? Within weeks, something that has never happened before happens across America. Kids who had Hulkamania bedsheets start ripping Hogan posters off their walls. Fathers who had used Hogan as a moral compass for their children suddenly don't know how to explain why their hero became the villain. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The older fans, the teenagers, the adults, they were mesmerized. Because finally, someone was admitting that heroes are complicated. That good people do bad things. That sometimes the most moral thing you can do is stop pretending to be moral. Hogan's heel turn gave an entire generation permission to be flawed. And for the first time in his career, Hogan was free. Free to be arrogant instead of humble. Free to be selfish instead of selfless. Free to admit that he was tired of carrying everyone else's expectations on his shoulders. You can't stop the power of the NWO wasn't a threat to his opponents. It was a promise to himself. You can't stop me from finally being real. But freedom came with a price. Every boo from the crowd. Every child who looked at him with betrayal in their eyes. Every parent who had to explain why heroes sometimes become villains. He'd traded universal love for personal authenticity. And the brutal truth? It felt better than he'd expected. Quote 4, "The power of the Hulkamaniacs will live forever." March 29, 2005. The night Hulk Hogan was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. A 61-year-old man, his blonde mustache now gray, his pythons now more memory than muscle, standing before 15,000 people who had grown up with him, grown old with him, forgiven him. And when he said the power of the Hulkamaniacs will live forever, his voice cracked. Not from age, from the weight of finally understanding what he'd actually created. Not entertainment, not even inspiration, legacy. He wasn't talking about wrestling fans, he was talking about family. Because after 25 years of characters and storylines and scripted drama, Hogan realized something that stopped his heart. The people in that audience hadn't just watched him perform. They'd grown up with him, survived childhood with him, learned about courage and failure and redemption alongside him. They weren't fans anymore. They were witnesses to a shared mythology. Rewind to 1997. Hogan is at the peak of his heel run, but something's eating at him. Letters keep arriving. Not hate mail, he expected that. But letters from parents thanking him for giving them something to bond with their kids over, even as the villain. "My son and I watch you every Monday," one father writes. "We argue about whether you're really bad or just pretending. It's the best conversations we've ever had." Another, "My daughter is going through a rough patch, but she says watching you taught her that people can change and still be loved." Slowly, painfully, beautifully, Hogan begins to understand the character never mattered. The storylines never mattered. What mattered was that for 30 minutes every week, families had something to believe in together. Even when they were booing him, they were believing in him. As Hogan speaks those words, the power of the Hulkamaniacs will live forever. Something never done before happens. The camera catches glimpses of the audience. Grown men crying, remembering the 8-year-old boys they used to be. Women holding signs thanking him for teaching their sons about respect. Teenagers who weren't even born during his heyday, but who inherited his mythology from their parents. 3 generations, united by a shared belief in the possibility of heroism. And suddenly Hogan realizes, he didn't create Hulkamaniacs, they created themselves. They just used his image as the template. The power of the Hulkamaniacs will live forever. As those words leave his lips, Hogan finally understands what he's actually saying. The goodness you found in yourselves because of me, that's not going anywhere. The courage you discovered, the strength you built, the hope you carried, that's yours now. I can age, I can fail, I can disappoint you again and again, but what you became because of what we shared together, that's eternal. It's not about him anymore. It never really was. It's about what happens when imperfect people inspire perfect moments. Here's what that moment taught us, what it's still teaching us 18 years later. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what other people carry forward. Hogan spent his entire career worried about whether he was worthy of people's admiration. But standing there that night, he finally realized the truth. Worthiness was never the point. Connection was the point. Transformation was the point. The courage to believe in something bigger than yourself, even when that something is flawed and human and struggling just like you are. The Hulkamaniacs didn't love him because he was perfect. They loved him because he taught them they could be powerful even when they weren't perfect. 4 quotes. 4 decades. Millions of lives touched. But here's what Hulk Hogan's words really taught us. Heroes aren't the people who never fail. Heroes are the people who keep trying to be worthy of the faith others place in them, even when they know they're falling short. Hogan was a flawed man who accidentally created a perfect philosophy: treat strangers like family, choose hope over cynicism, believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And when you fail, get back up and try again. Not because you're perfect, because your brothers are watching, and they need to know that getting back up is possible.